Hello. This isn't the right microphone. I don't know why my microphone isn't showing up. Default? Is this it? No. This can't be it. Is this it? Is this the right microphone? I don't know. I don't know if this is the right microphone though, because it doesn't like say it's my Yeti. Yeah, you hear me, but does this sound like the right microphone? Like, does it actually sound like I'm talking into this mic or like my laptop mic? This should work now. Hello, everybody! Good to see you all here. Always a pleasure. It's Friday. It's time to stream. And we got some good topics tonight. Got some really good topics tonight. We're just starting. We're waiting for people to get in. Get cozy. Get your snacks. Sit back and relax. Yes, happy Friday, everybody. How's everybody doing? How's your week been going? Any good news? Any new news? Is everything well? What's happening? What's happening in the community? I'm over that song. Let's see. Hello, Renaissance Fairy. Hello, Lucifer. Hello, Specs. And Laura, good to see you as always. Lucifer's trying to find out if he should remain blonde or go reddish brown auburn. That's a good question. Alright, I've had enough of music. I'm like, that's distracting right now. sounded like music on one of the Minecraft videos. Probably. I mean, the options of music I'm picking from are provided by YouTube, so you've probably seen them on another video. Might go reddish brown, do the reddish brown. Why not? Go the reddish brown. So today we got some interesting subjects. First, kind of going to start getting into what is known as the Cass report. And it is a report written by Hilary Cass over in England. A critique and examination of healthcare for trans children. And the reason we're going to start with that is because this argument is bleeding into the hard problem of consciousness, which is talking about the brain and consciousness and how there's a big gap between that, and neuroscience can't figure that out, and it's this whole thing. And so it's very Neogenian, so stick with me on that. We're going to get talking about that. And then so two situations, because I'm being a shithead on Twitter. So one, this also talking about the Cass report and the trans healthcare. I stumbled onto this guy's Twitter where he's like a podcaster, whatever, over in England. And he made a very firm statement that you are your body. And to suggest that you're not your body is just pure religion. And as a Neogenian, I'm like, no. And so I kind of got in with him a little bit of it. And this guy is, doesn't really delegate himself well, I think, and for many reasons. But we're going to get into that drama because this goes into the conversation of how consciousness is not produced by the brain. Consciousness is not matter. It's not produced by matter. Matter doesn't create consciousness. So we're going to get into that discussion because I believe this is the heart of the discussion when it comes to accepting the realization that trans people exist and trans people have trans experiences. So this is going to be a very deep conversation about the hard problem of consciousness. Then I have this other little tiff going on, and it's a similar tiff like last week when we exposed this Mormon comedian guy. Well, there's another Mormon that's pretty much arguing the same thing about the Mormon religion, and Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormon religion, was not having appropriate relations with very young teenage girls. And so this guy is also putting forth the argument well, technically it wasn't illegal, this, that, or the other. He wants to explore all these technicalities, which is interesting coming from a Mormon, needing technicalities to find out if something is true when they don't need technicalities to find out if the gospel is true. They need pure feelings. So that's going to get into an interesting conversation where yes, we are going to talk a little bit about the history of Joseph Smith and his actual charges for certain sexual crimes. But it's also going to be a conversation on what types of knowledge there is in the world, because Mormons will say, well, the way I confirmed this gospel to be true is I read the information, I prayed about it, and God gave me a feeling to confirm it's true. So we're going to talk about confirmations of truth and knowledge through feelings or through reasoning, which is also a very deep conversation because they're not interchangeable as valid sources to confirm something is objectively true. But when it comes to rational thinking and then just thinking with feelings and religiously, I mean, this is an issue in humanity. People conflate the two and get it off. And it's we need to have that conversation about different kinds of ways of taking in information intuitively or rationally. So a lot of interesting conversation. And then we have lots of other little things to just look at. because, you know, we are going to briefly touch on Joseph Smith and the history of his charges of sexual crimes back in the 1800s. And speaking of 1800 or 1700s, I can't remember what it's called. It's like 1850 or like early 1800s. And then it's like, yeah, early 1800s, mid 1800s. And another thing that's going on, going back to the mid 1800s, is Arizona's abortion laws that are going back to, like, what is it, 1864? Yeah, so let's go back in time for a little bit. Isn't that fun? Isn't that fun? So let's see. Other little tiny things, yeah, that, and then in a Louisiana high court, priests have a property right not to be sued for sexual abuse. So that's a very concerning, like, small story. And then something else, I guess, Lauren Boebert is dragged for having her youngest son star in a cringy new campaign ad. We're going to take a look at that. And then maybe we'll get into Marjorie Taylor Greene a little bit because she's popping off and that's always funny. So just like we got like main topics, but we also like have a medley of other small things to like do in between. 1854. No, it's 64. I'm looking at the information. It's 1864. So yeah, we will start jumping into that in just 2 seconds. We shall give a little grace to those who are still finding their way and getting the notifications late, which is usually the case. Some people get the notification that we're live a little too late. And on that note, I need to share my stream on social media outlets. Let's see. Share on Twitter. Let's see. Live now. Hard problem of consciousness. Let's see. Joseph Smith. Oh, the Cass report and Joseph Smith crimes. Link below. All right, everybody can follow me on Twitter if they like. Okay. All right, we got that going on there. And let's see, let's post it over on Facebook. Why not? Even though I feel like Facebook is dead, at least for me. There's like nothing going on there. I don't know if anybody even sees anything that I post over there. Well, hello, Angelica, and hello, MC. Good to see you. No, you're just in time. We are just about to get started. We were waiting just for you. I have so many windows up. My computer's like, why? I think my computer's getting old. It's crossing the... It's going to be crossing 5 years here soon. All right, posting this. Let's see, live now. Live now. Post. Okay, we're good on there. We are good, my friends. So let's see. Recently, last week, in England, there is this woman, this old, I think she's a retired pediatrician, goes by Hilary Cass, created what is known as the Cass Report or the Cass Review. um, for the health, kind of commissioned by healthcare over there. And so pretty much in a nutshell, let's see, let's pull up a picture of Hillary Cass. So this is Hillary Cass, and she is highly critical of the method of treatment for trans children and trans people in general, and just treatment of gender incongruency. You know, when somebody feels that they don't align with what their body is, right? Trans. Her attitude and philosophy about this subject is that, number one, she thinks that this is all like to give children, like, for example, puberty blockers, a medication that blocks your puberty, you know, it's meant to give children time to decide and figure out if they really are not the gender that's, you know, aligned with their body. It gives them time to figure that out and decide if they want to go on actual hormonal treatment, and thus that and the other. So Hillary Cass is very against this idea. And she believes that these puberty blockers, this medication, is actually damaging. And there's really not much to support that idea. But she's supporting that idea within the realm of this sort of cultural debate that's happening. She very much aligns herself with other women who are highly against the existence of trans people. Think about the J.K. Rowling crew, the very anti-trans narratives and things like that. Only, you know, she's an old pediatrician, so she's going to try and have some say. So the report is like 388 pages long. I have read through it. We're not going to go word for word through it right now. You can definitely find it. Let's see, the Cass report. You can find it and download it easily through just like right here. You know. The problem with the Cass report is that it's first of all approach, the attitude of the approach, the attitude of her who has supposedly been studying this issue for 4 years now. Intention that you have when going into like a medical study or a scientific study or whatever, or just making any sort of report, your intention going into it, I think shouldn't be thrown to the wayside. Because her ultimate intention in going through with this is to disprove the existence of trans people, and perhaps if not that, if she wants to really like put her foot down and say, no, that's not what I'm doing, try to say that the majority of children that say they are having gender dysphoria, that the gender dysphoria is actually a symptom of something else, such as perhaps autism or sexual abuse or anorexia or some other underlying mental condition. Now, that's an idea that's not necessarily wrong to think. Hey, what if these kids are actually suffering from something else and this is a mistake? Yeah, okay. And in her report, she does highlight some problems within medical care in general that I don't think she's willing to go that route. And then there, of course, in studies like this, there's involved statistics, other studies, and the biggest issue, though, is that out of 100 and some odd studies that show success in children being treated in the way that we are currently treating them, she's decided to literally ignore like 98% of those studies, and she just happened to consider those studies as low quality, which is really concerning, I think. That you're going into this issue and you purposefully ignore the studies that don't work for you and your original intention. They don't confirm your original intention, but you highlight the stories that are inconclusive enough to support your intention. There's a lot of conversation to be had here. One journalist I really like, her name is Erin Reed, and you can go to erininthe.morning.com. Erin in the Morning is an independent journalist, and she is so good at like narrowing down and nailing down sort of anti-trans everything. Political stuff, medical stuff, everything. She's very good. Definitely a source I trust. So, we're going to go over this because this thing with Hillary Cass gets even deeper. So, Cass met with Ron DeSantis, you know, governor of Florida, we know how they feel about trans kids. Cass met with DeSantis pick over trans ban. Her review now targets England trans care. The review released Wednesday calls for restrictions on trans care, social transition, and transgender adults up to the age of 25 from entering adult trans health treatment in England. Let me blow this up. So anyways, on Tuesday evening, Dr. Hillary Cass released a final report commissioned by NHS, widely expected to target gender-affirming care. The report met these expectations, calling for restrictions on gender-affirming care and social transition, and even advocated for blocking transgender adults under the age of 25 from entering adult care. To justify these recommendations, the review dismissed over 100 studies on the efficacy of transgender care as not suitable high quality, applying standards that are unattainable and not required for most other pediatric medicine. So a lot of this lady's standards for what is considered high quality, it's that kind of standard isn't upheld for most other pediatrics. There's more of that. So yeah, Hillary Cass dismissed over 100 studies. Because why? She said that they weren't high enough quality. But here's the thing. You know how when you talk about science, let's talk about the word theory. If we use the word theory like colloquially, it's just like it's a theory, you know. But if you use theory in science, like when you read that word in a scientific study, that means something, right? That means it's not just an idea. It means like there's a lot of research and study and some evidence to support said idea. So when you read like medical stuff like this, like when they say things like low quality and high quality, it's not what you actually think it means when you first hear those words. For example, a study that, or that something that is like low quality evidence would be parachutes. The studies on parachutes and how safe they are is actually low quality. But we don't sit here and say don't use a parachute because there's low quality evidence to support that using parachutes is good. You know what I mean? You see what I mean there? Like, you have to like be really careful about these terms and things. Anyways, so the standards this lady has for what should be done and how this care should be conducted with trans children is unrealistic. It's so unrealistic, it's kind of suspicious how this same attitude and standard isn't being applied to other medicines given out to children. So, conducted in a manner similar to the anti-trans view by the DeSantis hand-picked Board of Medicine in Florida, which Cass reportedly collaborated on. The report and its reviews are likely to underpin further crackdowns on trans care globally. So, Hillary Cass, who made this report, also collaborated on a hand-picked Board of Medicine in Florida that, you know, Ron DeSantis hand-picked, and they created their own document and review of healthcare for trans children. And it was also not based on anything much at all. It was also very biased. Anyways, the 388-page report featured 32 recommendations on how transgender care should be conducted within NHS England. It incorrectly claims that there is no good evidence supporting transgender care and calls for restriction on trans care for individuals under the age of 18, although it does not advocate for an outright ban. The report endorses the idea that being transgender may be caused by anxiety, depression, and OCD issues, despite the American Psychological Association, the largest psychological association in the world, rebutting this as lacking evidence. It also claims that transgender individuals can be influenced into being trans, a nod to the discredited theory of social contagion and rapid onset gender dysphoria, rejected by over 60 mental health organizations. So this is also the other thing when it comes to anti-trans arguments, is that children are suddenly becoming trans just because like their friend is, or they saw it on TikTok. It's an interesting theory, but it's not entirely true. And it's called social contagion. I believe this is... God, my computer is being so slow lately. I gotta do something. Maybe I need to take it into a shop and get it fixed or whatever. The Coalition for Advancement and Application of Psychological Science. And this is the statement on rapid onset gender dysphoria. As an organization committed to the generation and application of clinical science for the public good, the Coalition for the Advancement and Application of Psychological Sciences, or CAPS, supports eliminating the use of rapid onset gender dysphoria and similar concepts for clinical and diagnostic application, given the lack of rigorous blah 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 for its existence. Let's see, this, that, and the other. Keep going. I'm trying to like... Anyways. This is the incorrect claim. That there is no good evidence. Wait, was this the rebutting one? Oh, here we go. Oh, that's where it went. I looked up the wrong thing. I'm like, wait a minute. This is the other thing. Anyways, APA policy statement on the affirming evidence-based inclusive care for transgender and gender diverse and non-binary individuals, addressing misinformation and the role of psychological practice in science. Big policy statement. You can find that there. Also, if you go to Aaron in the Morning, you can find the article and all these sources. So anyways, the largest psychological association in the world rebutted their claim as lacking evidence. It's right here. This. You can read this document here. It also claims that transgender individuals can be influenced into being trans. Oh yeah, that was discredited. Anyways. Lastly, it seemingly endorses restrictions on transgender people under the age of 25, stating that they should not be allowed to progress into adult clinics. So more on that stuff. The reason I'm brushing over this is because I'm trying to get to the end of the shrubbery maze with this issue, because as I said, you can download the CAS report and read it, and then you can read all the people supporting it and people not supporting it, this, that, the other, decide for yourself. There's something underlying in all of this. And it's from the CAS report that pretty much says that you are your body. She has very weird ideas. Okay, so check this out. The CAS review also touches on gendered toys, suggesting that preferences like trucks for boys and dolls for girls might have biological basis, despite significant controversy over such claims. With a recent study casting doubt on earlier monkey studies used to justify biological differences in toy preferences, a common assumption is that toy choice and other gender role behaviors are solely a result of social influences. For example, that boys will only be given trucks and girls will only be given dolls to play with. Although this is partially true, there is evidence for parental and postnatal hormonal influence on these behaviors. That's what Cass wrote in the report. To support arguments around potentially high detransition states, Cass repeatedly cites Ken Zucker, often challenged that blah, 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 blah. Okay, so Dr. Cass has some very interesting ideas about boys and girls and about gender identity. And she's it's like a bioessentialist. What is bioessentialism? I don't remember things. Bioessentialism. Some sort of bioessentialism. Let's see. The belief that human nature and individual's personality or some specific quality is innate and natural essence rather than being brought up by culture. So pretty much just like however we are naturally as like people, right? If we're masculine, feminine, if we're gay, if we're creative, if we're smart, if we're dumb, it all has something to do with our bodies. It's a production from our bodies. So the concept is typically invoked where the focus is on difference, as where females are seen as essentially different from males. And it's like gender essentialism, the term often been used pejoratively by constructionists, also often used synonymously with biological determinism. Biological determinism. That's new to me. Biological determinism, the idea that most human characteristics, physical and mental, are determined at conception by hereditary factors passed from parent to offspring. So I think you can see where this is going. This argument about trans people is pretty much saying you can't be trans, you can't possibly be born in the wrong body because you are your body. You are a product of your body. And this is so severely wrong. Because if that's right, if that is absolutely right 100%, this answers one of the biggest mysteries that neuroscientists and philosophers and physicists are trying to figure out. I think you all are starting to get the idea of the Cas report, right? Because there's so many like offshoots of pathways we can take, talk about this, talk about that. But I just wanted to get enough into this Cas review and report written by this lady to give you an idea that she thinks you are a product of your body. Your body, which is just a simple mechanistic piece of meat. So as I was, looking at people talking about this issue, I came across this guy. His name is Stephen Knight, and he's a podcaster, I guess. Not terribly big, but big enough. He's a guy in England, and he made a very strong statement in support of the Cas report. And he made a very strong statement about it that I had to say something to, and that he did not like, and actually tried to put me on blast on it. It didn't really, he didn't, he put me on blast. Like, I got bugged a little bit about it, but here's the thing that I want to get into. This, first of all, this guy's an asshole. He was very rude to me. Because I just kind of said, like, I just don't think you really like trans people. And he's like, how dare you say that? And then he proceeded to call me a racist. And I was like, wait, where did that come from? And he's like, I'm just trying to teach you a lesson. And it was like a very confusing conversation. I don't know where he was going with that, but I'm more interested in this thing that he has to say. Is my thing on there? Because he really was rude. I mean, I'm very sassy myself, but did he delete my comment? Yeah, anyways. Maybe this is a new thing, I don't know. Anyways, listen to this dude.
Complex needs that this is an important point. This is a heterogeneous group with broad-ranging presentations, often including complex needs that extend beyond gender-related distress, and this needs to be reflected in the services offered to them by the NHS. This is a great point, because there's this perception that trans people are one group, it's one homogenous block. They're all basically people trapped in the wrong body. That's the one catch-all explanation that's been floated and digested uncritically and unthinkingly. That's a religious idea. You can't be trapped in your body. You are your body. It makes no sense. It's just a nice myth and fiction we tell people to help explain a very complex issue. This is an important point.
So, Stephen Knight thinks that it's simply a religious idea that you are trapped in your body when in fact you are a body, and he thinks it's very silly to think otherwise. Stephen Knight might be the smartest fucking person in the world if he thinks he has the ultimate answer to one of the biggest issues, like I said, that neuroscientists, philosophers, and physicists can't figure out. How the fuck does Stephen Knight, a man with a small, let's see, let's look at him, podcast that mostly platforms anti-trans feminists on his thing, how is he able to figure out such a crazy issue, like magically? Wait, this is the wrong guy. All right, let's go. Where's his, does he have a Instagram? I thought he had an Instagram. Man, my computer's being so fucking slow. So, Stephen Knight's YouTube channel. He is a podcaster and a commentator. He does interviews and things like that. Him and I got in back and forth into this issue of, like, consciousness is not a product of the brain. And he asked me where my peer-reviewed sources are. But if you're asking that question when it comes to the hard problem of consciousness, you're asking the wrong question, because the whole point of the hard problem of consciousness is there is no empirical evidence, but there's evidence of it, rational evidence of it, and we can't bridge that gap. Oh, we spent 2 hours doing this in a sermon of fucking materialism. So anyways, I was going down here. Oh, look. He filmed the entirety of Posey Parker's speech. Posey Parker is that weird British lady who allowed... she also goes by Kelly J. Keane. Posey Parker, whatever. Anyway, she's this anti-trans woman, and she aligns herself with literal neo-Nazis that she allowed to speak on behalf of her and for her. So this guy is really biased. And another thing about Stephen Knight, I don't know what the fuck he calls himself, and I don't give a shit. Where's his Instagram? Because I noticed on his Instagram, yes. Man, he is such a clout chaser. No, this is not it. That is not it. Where is his thing? Instagram. Stephen Knight. Oh, jeez. Podcast. That wasn't it. Why can't I find it? And why can't I pee? That is not the right Stephen Knight. Okay, so I can't find his fucking Instagram for some reason. I just found it like a couple days ago, which is weird. G spell checker. There we go. All right, this guy, award-winning host of the Godless Spell Checker podcast. So he is atheist, and he's very much into like a religious belief in science, in which I think he got like really mad at me. I noticed he posted like something of, where is it? God, my computer's so slow. Oh, Ricky Gervais. So he posted this quote or this comment by Ricky Gervais, who's like in support of his work. Ricky Gervais, if you don't know, he's a comedian and stuff. He's actually extremely transphobic, like to a disgusting degree. But, you know, has very good criticisms against religion. So this guy is kind of the same. This Stephen Knight. And so he's definitely very biased. Of course, he's going to support the Kaz report. And he made a hard statement that it's a religious idea. You can't be trapped in your body. You are your body. Well, it's not a religious idea. The idea that you are not your body is not a purely religious idea. Stephen Knight is wrong. Like 100% wrong. And what this goes into is the hard problem of consciousness. Now, in Neogenian, we always say, you are not your brain. You are not your body. This is a direct opposition to what Stephen Knight is claiming, where he says you are your body. Why do Neogenians say you are not your body? Is that a religious belief? No. This is a very rational conclusion based on plenty of study, plenty of thought by high-end, high-quality educated people. What is the hard problem of consciousness? The hard problem of consciousness is the problem of explaining why any physical state is conscious rather than non-conscious. It is the problem of explaining why there is something it is like for a subject in conscious experience, why conscious mental states light up and directly appear to the subject. The usual methods of science involve explanation of functional, dynamical, and structural properties, explanation of what a thing does, how it changes over time, and how it is put together. So we're talking about consciousness, and we're trying to figure out what is it and how is it produced by the brain? Like, how is this vast, unmeasurable, abstract thing produced by something so finite? It's very interesting, isn't it? But even after we have explained the functional, dynamical, and structural properties of the conscious mind, we can still meaningfully ask the question, why is it consciousness? This suggests that an explanation of consciousness will have to go beyond the usual methods of science. Consciousness, therefore, presents a hard problem for science, or perhaps it marks the limits of what science can explain. Explaining why consciousness occurs at all can be contrasted with the so-called easy problems of consciousness, the problems of explaining the function, dynamics, and structure of consciousness. These features can be explained using the usual methods of science, but that leaves the question of why there is something it is like for a subject when these functions, dynamics, and structures are present. This is the hard problem. So science and neuroscience can explain a lot. They can observe the brain and see a lot of things light up in correlation with what we're experiencing. But materialistic science can't explain why this happens, or like why we feel like, it's like, well, if I feel pain, it's like, what does it feel like? There's this weird, they can see how the brain reacts when you feel pain, but it can't explain what it feels like. Very odd thing. Let's see. In more detail, the challenge arises because it does not seem that the qualitative and subjective as aspects of consciousness experience how consciousness feels. That's what science can explain. And the fact that it is directly, for me, fit into a physicalitis ontology, one consisting of just the basic elements of physics plus structural, dynamical, and functional, and blah, 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 basic elements, it appears that even a complete specification of a creature in physical terms leaves unanswered the question of whether or not the creature is conscious. And it seems that we can easily conceive of creatures just like us physically and functionally, and that nonetheless lack consciousness. This indicates that physical explanation of consciousness is fundamentally incomplete. You cannot physically explain consciousness. You literally can't. It leaves out what is like to be the subject for the subject. There seems to be an unbridgeable explanatory gap between the physical world and consciousness. All these factors make the hard problem hard. The hard problem was so named by David Chalmers in 1995. We're going to fucking look at what David has to say today. The problem is major focus of research in contemporary philosophy of mind, and there is a considerable body of empirical research in psychology, neuroscience, and even quantum physics. The problem touches on issues in ontology, on the natural nature and limits of scientific explanation, and on the accuracy and scope of introspections and first knowing knowledge, to name a few. Reactions to the hard problem range from an outright denial that this is an issue to naturalistic reduction to panpsychism, the claim that everything is conscious to some degree, to full-blown mind-body dualism. Okay? This is our area, folks. For the Neogenians in the house, this is our area. When this, I'll say it, twat, Stephen Knight, says that this is a religious idea and you can't be trapped in your body, you are your body, he's wrong on so many levels. And yet so confidently right. I swear to God he deleted my comment because I'm not seeing it here. Like, he was really mad at me. Let me see. Let me pull this over and see if I can find it. Like, he was calling me stupid and all that stuff. Let me try and find this. I have to pee so bad, but I'm trying to hold it in. Always trying to say off you pop. Okay, here we go. So I'm just like, I made this comment. I'm like, no wonder he thinks trans is a religion. He thinks that the body produces consciousness, and appeal to materialism and religious belief in itself. And I reposted this exact clip. Lo and behold, he decided to respond to me. So he says, I don't say a single thing about consciousness in this clip. Are you okay? It's like, bro, you just said you are your body. If you're saying the phrase, you are your body, you're definitely bringing consciousness into the conversation. So sitting here and being like, I didn't say anything about consciousness. Are you okay? That's a dumb take. So anyways, I said, you are your body. And he says, correct. What else could you possibly be except for your physical self without introducing faith, religion into your reasoning? Well, plenty of reasoning is being brought into this. The hard problem of consciousness. He just hasn't heard of it yet. So I just said, thinking everything is material is a belief. You can't objectively observe or measure consciousness. This is a complete denial of the internal reality unmeasured by empirical science, where the philosophical underpinnings of the science are severely underrated. And so he says, so if something's unmeasured by science, it means there is no evidence for it. You are clearly floating faith-based beliefs about the nature of consciousness. You are doing the very thing I'm talking about. So again, Stephen, you have not heard about this issue, have you? Something that has, a hand in by psychologists, neuroscientists, and even quantum physicists. Suddenly, Stephen Knight has this all figured out. And that's where I called him out. I'm like, you just haven't heard about this before because, we're clinging to your materialist dogma. And I'm saying you don't need religion to understand the failure of empiricism in explaining consciousness or what reality is. So he says, yes, consciousness is mysterious. Okay, we got somewhere. And then he says, I've interviewed neuroscientists on the issue. Okay, who? What's a better method for attempting to understand consciousness than empiricism? Name it. Hello, here we go. So I said mathematics fills in the gap when understanding what reality is and what consciousness is. It's energy that can be observed through mathematics, breaking down matter all the way down so you have nothing left but mathematical forces. So here's where he says, can I please see your mathematical equation demonstrating that consciousness is something other than a product of and external to the human brain? Thanks in advance. And so here's the problem I have is it's really hard to have this kind of complex conversation on Twitter. And I'm not a good tweeter. Like, I'm not, because you have very limited characters that you can post. You can only post a couple of sentences. So I'm like, all right, let me try this. So I'm like, let's talk about the God equation, which isn't proof of God per se, but it shows that, the energy, it's an energy that produces matter. Matter doesn't produce energy. Energy is neither created or destroyed. Reality is fundamentally frequency, and so is consciousness. And then he just keeps going back. Proof of self-perpetuating energy is not proof of enduring conscious energy. You don't appear to know what you mean. And he said, and I'm like, you don't endure conscious energy. You are conscious energy. I know what I mean. And then, so he's like, okay, we are conscious energy. Please, can you point out to the peer-reviewed evidence concluding that our conscious energy survives our death? Thanks. So I tried to go into near-death experiences, and he's just like talking about like, well, can you please explain what the N stands for in NDE? So his point is because they're technically classified as near-death experiences, the person didn't actually die. Therefore, any evidence we have about that and consciousness existing outside the body isn't real. But that's not how that works. And so as you can go down, he says like, off you pop then. So this guy is really full of himself, like really full of himself. And he's so sure too, but has he talked about this hard problem of consciousness? Now, he says he interviewed neuroscientists on the issue. I haven't found it yet, so maybe that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I haven't found it yet. But just looking at this, it seems like this man pretty much just sits back and relies on interviews. I don't really see much of his own thought, really. I mean, he just kind of, it's like he either agrees with people or he doesn't. He doesn't really do much, but, him telling me off I pop as if like I'm silly and insignificant, yet he had to argue with me on the subject on my own page, but mind you, like this is my own post on my own page. So he came over to me and was, pestering me about this. And I'm wondering if this is where he did that weird racism thing too. Or did he get rid of my he got rid of my comment. Yo, did he? Yo. I think he got rid of my comment. So I made this comment. I'm like, I don't think you like trans people. And he's like, well, so he was mentioning something that, oh, this was on a different post. Okay. Okay, so here was his thing. Just to give you a painter of like his attitude. So he was talking about how the only weapon in the arsenal of gender activists is to smear any dissenter as a bigot. So stop caring about being called a bigot when you know you are not, and don't be silent when others are treated this way. Say what you know to be true, but don't be cowed by the smears of deeply unserious people. So he's trying to say that because trans activists call people like him bigoted, that immediately means they're unserious. So I said, this is projection incarnate. Like, it really is. Like, you're just absolutely projecting there. So he says, please feel free to highlight any religious-like positions I hold on this issue whenever you are ready. I never talked about religious positions, by the way. So I said, you use self-righteous language to accuse others of exactly what you do, which is to cling to belief. Just admit you don't like trans and get over yourself. So then he says, as I thought, no examples of this religious-like belief. Thanks for proving my point about unserious people reaching straight for the bigotry label, though. But I expect nothing less from a massive racist. And I'm like, that's not hypocrisy. And then there's Angelica, like, what? So going back, I kind of like took that. This gets better. So I reposted that. I'm like, you can't make this shit up. He's accusing me. He says, you're so unserious for reaching for the bigotry label, you racist. And I'm like, well, thanks for proving that you project. So he comes on again, because I guess he's just really upset with me. He says, you seem to lack self-awareness to understand that I just mirrored your own behavior back to you to make a point. The point being that it's an unhinged and completely unserious way to behave, which you appear to have noticed. Ha ha. Now, did I mirror did I call him a bigot? No. The only thing I said is, like, you seem to not like trans people, to which he responded with, I wouldn't expect nothing less from a massive racist. And the reason he's calling me a racist, as he explains here, he knows I'm not a racist, but he's calling me that to teach me a lesson because he thinks he's mirroring my behavior, which apparently makes him look better for some reason. I'm not really sure how that makes him look better. So I'm like, no, you didn't mirror my behavior. And he's like, you literally opened this exchange by telling me I hold my positions because I don't like trans people. Well, yeah, the way you talk about trans people, dude, saying that it's a religion, like, yeah, you don't like trans people. And so I'm like, it's pretty obvious you don't like trans people and all this. So he says it's pretty obvious you don't like black people. It's not a hunch or an assumption. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, did your racism develop on its own, or did your parents make you racist? And again, I'm just like, what? And he's like, oh, it's parents. Got it. So I posted the skull, which is like, people post this when they're laughing so hard. It's like, you know. And then he like posts on this and he's like, yeah, racists are a big fan of skulls, specifically their dimensions. So this guy is like doubling and tripling down on calling me a racist, knowing I'm not a racist, but he's doing it to teach me a lesson. I don't know what the lesson is I'm supposed to be learning here, because first of all, I didn't say he was a bigot. I just said, you just don't like trans people. But he decided to take it to this level. So Stephen Knight, let's see. He's got over 70K followers here on Twitter. And let's see. GS spell checker YouTube. And on YouTube, he has... I think like just over 8,000 followers on YouTube. But the reason I'm showing you all that stuff about like him telling me I'm a racist just to like teach me a lesson, I'm just showing you that to paint a picture of his attitude. Like, straight up. Let's see. Okay, so he has just over 8,000 subscribers and 288 videos. So, I mean, he's definitely got content under his belt, but he's not the end all and be all. And this man who is, you know, very witty, very smart, and apparently has solved everything, somehow cannot explain the hard problem of consciousness and completely writes it off as pure religion. However, it is not pure religion, and David Chalmers, I'm sure, would highly agree and hand him his ass. But I have to pee, and then we're going to get into the actual hard problem of consciousness, because no, you are not your body. No, the brain doesn't magically produce consciousness. No, consciousness is not a mere illusion. It is a thing. There's a way to get to it, and people like Stephen Knight are fucking dumbasses if they think otherwise. So I have to pee. Ping. Where's the pee screen? Where's my pee screen? Oh, it's right here. You didn't get the music with... I thought it wasn't playing. Hold on. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why you can't hear the music. Lame. Why is my sound fucking up? So, anyways, going back to why Stephen Knight, I don't know what the Stephen, I don't give a fucking shit. Why he's an absolute twat and doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about when he says you are your body, and he thinks it's a religious idea otherwise. Idiot. Dunce cap. Let's talk about the hard problem of consciousness and why Stephen Knight is wrong about it, and the 2 fucking neuroscientists he thinks he interviewed. Whatever, I don't give a shit. Going to David Chalmers. And actually, before that, let's do a little intro video to the hard problem of consciousness. We're going to learn about it, okay? It just played for a second. Oh, okay. Well, fuck, I don't know. Honestly, it's so funny. The only thing his whole thing about being a bigot and that and whatever, like, I don't care about that conversation where he was like accusing me of being a racist on purpose to teach me a lesson, which is like, what? Never mind that. He got so angry with me when I'm like, no, consciousness is not a product of the brain. And he's like, well, give me the peer-reviewed sources. It's like, there isn't, because that's the problem. That's why it's a problem. Hello. But he thinks he's so smart and he's got life all figured out. So. He's a smart guy. Okay. Off you pop. Listen here, lad. I'm gonna tell you all about the hard problem of consciousness. Something you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Obviously never fucking heard about it before, but he's gonna pretend to be a fucking expert, sorry. It's annoying when people are so confidently stupid. You know what I mean?
Science explains a lot of things. Why the northern lights appear in the sky, how diseases spread across the world, or how the human body protects itself from viruses and bacteria. But can science explain one of the deepest mysteries of all? Can it explain our conscious mental experiences? In this Wi-Fi video, we'll explore this issue in what's known as the hard problem of consciousness. Suppose you're at a gallery looking at a painting by Rothko. The top half of it is painted in a vivid red, while the bottom half is covered in a dull maroon. The person next to you is staring at it intensely. What is she seeing? Does she see the same colors as you do? What's more, does she feel the same way you do when you look at the painting? Say you get chatting and you convince it to wear some techie headgear that scientists use to monitor brainwaves. You can now see exactly what her brain is doing when she looks at the painting. Will this tell you what it is like for her to see the painting? If you think it does, then you must be assuming that we can study consciousness experience scientifically, and that.
So that's the problem, is we can understand how people perceive things. Like, we can understand how the body perceives pain, very, like, basically by that we see there's a reaction in the brain. We see there's reaction with nerves and this and that and the other. But we can't, like, empirically and objectively say what it's like. Because you could apply the same pain or the same method of creating pain for, like, a group of 10 people, and they won't describe the sensation the same, and it won't be the same for everyone. I know it's really hard, and, like, honestly, like, I'm still working on wrapping my head around it, but that's the thing. So when people like Stephen Knight, in all his glory, tries to say that you are your body, he's denying the fact that people have a trans experience. People experience being trans, and because he can't objectively prove that, like, across the board, he thinks it's a religion. But you can't physically prove what things feel like. It doesn't make any. We're gonna get more into this, okay? Because, like I said, he's a massive twat.
By studying what's happening in the brain, we can understand conscious mental experiences. But is this actually possible? can we understand conscious mental experience through scientific studies of the brain. According to the philosopher Thomas Nagel, an organism has conscious mental states if and only if there is something it is like to be that organism. So there is something it is like to be a bat, a dolphin, the person next to you at the gallery, and you. There is something it is like to be you. All of these creatures have various kinds of experiences that differ in interesting ways. By contrast, there is nothing it is like to be a piece of cheese or a cell phone, because none of these things have
Hi, Susan. Good to see you, Susan. Susan, you just came in right after I showed what an idiot Stephen Knight is because he's claiming that you are your body. So now we're talking about the hard problem of consciousness. This British douchebag is like, off you pop now. It's a religion. Chip chip cheerio. It's like, bitch, you just did not solve like the greatest conundrum by fucking like... Yeah, he is a materialist. And here's the thing, too, is I tried to point out, when you come across issues like the hard problem of consciousness, this is an area of life that it becomes clear that you can't rely on materialism and empirical evidence for everything. And to rely and lean heavily into that is a belief system in itself. It's a scientific belief. It's based in science, but it's still a belief system. To say very confidently, you are your body, is a belief. Because if you take that apart, it's not going to work.
Conscious mental states. There's also something it is like to have specific mental states. For example, the experience of seeing the Northern Lights is very different from the experience of hearing a loud drum kit. And these experiences, in turn, are very different from the experience of tasting the bitterness of coffee or the experience of feeling the grainy quality of sand in your hands.
Right. And in Steven's case where he's like, oh, trans people don't, that's not a real thing. Well, it's like, well, people are having the experience of trans. They are experiencing being trans. And it's much different than anybody else's experience. So when you yourself have no idea what it's like to have the trans experience, you can't, in all good faith and good consciousness, no pun intended, say that it doesn't exist. Because it does. The trans experience exists. People have it. It's not a hallucination. It's happening.
You might be thinking, hang on a minute, don't we already know a lot about the brain? So surely neuroscientists have a good understanding of all these conscious mental experiences, right? Yes, they do. A bit. Neuroscientists are making a lot of progress in identifying some features that are correlated with consciousness. And while these scientists are hard at work understanding the brain and our conscious mental states, no one has yet given a complete scientific explanation of consciousness.
Because that's why all we have found so far in neuroscience is correlations. We know that some parts of the brain light up and activate with some experiences, but we don't know why. We can't really explain it. And it's this complete fallacy of like correlation implies causation. Correlation does not imply causation. Just because consciousness is correlated with the brain doesn't mean that the brain is causing consciousness. Susan says, is he assuming that he's conflating consciousness with mind? No, I think that I don't think they're thinking that deeply. It's like when people just refer to Satan and Lucifer and stuff all as the same thing. It's like, I feel like they just use these terms interchangeably, but ultimately their stance is biodeterminism. It's biodeterminism and it's materialism, that the inner experience in consciousness is just a symptom or byproduct of the brain or matter. Therefore, you have to act and behave according to your biological sex. or your biology, but it doesn't make sense because again, this just brings in the hard problem of consciousness, and they can't confidently, I mean, they do confidently say that, but they can't confidently say they've solved that. And that's what I think should be interesting. I think philosophers, honestly, and neuroscientists should come up to bat for this issue, this cultural issue of trans and trans care, because this really does bring up consciousness and the brain and the correlation and what the fuck is what. Like, this is a time to really, for humanity to really talk about it. Yes, but he's using consciousness to mean mind as well. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's using it all interchangeably. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Yeah, if he's so, and that's the other thing too. He was so quick to dismiss it because he couldn't even like have a good faith conversation about it. Like, oh, this is interesting. Like, let's get into it. Like, it was just instantly like, oh, you're religious. Haha, off you pop now. Chip chip cheerio. Like, he really was like that big of a douchebag. Like, you're full of shit. Haha, I'm smart and I have a podcast. Chip chip cheerio. Anyways, back to this.
Moreover, the problem isn't about identifying the neural states that are correlated with consciousness. The question, instead, is how and why certain neural states, or any states for that matter, give rise to conscious experiences at all. The issue for some philosophers is then that we might not, in principle, be able to give a scientific explanation for consciousness. The problem we are engaged with here is what the philosopher David Chalmers calls a hard problem of consciousness. The problem of explaining how and why physical processing gives rise to experiences with a phenomenal character. But why is this so hard? According to Nagel, the essence of the problem of consciousness derives from the apparent fact that any scientific description of conscious states seems to be compatible with the absence of consciousness. Let's look at a more familiar example, a drum kit. A drum kit, at its most basic form, consists of a snare drum, a bass drum, a hi-hat, and a ride cymbal. Let's throw in some tom-toms and crash cymbals for good measure. Now if we get all these bits in the right arrangement, then we get a drum kit. In other words, we shouldn't be able to imagine a case where we have all this and yet don't have a drum kit. In the same way, if scientists arrive at a full account of consciousness solely in terms of what's happening in the brain, it should be impossible for us to imagine these processes happening in someone's brain without them being phenomenally conscious. But the problem is that it seems like we can imagine such scenarios. To see this, consider philosophical zombies. These aren't the sort of creatures you see in horror movies. Philosophical zombies are creatures that are physically exactly like you or I, but which lack consciousness. These zombies talk and walk like us. They get around, go to work, have...
This is like when we talk about the conceptualizations of NPCs or non-playing characters. Like, is there a possibility of non-playing characters? And I believe Morg has covered this topic like extensively, and essentially no. They can seem like that.
Dinner, and even dance. Importantly, they also have the same brain processes as us. They just lack consciousness. There's nothing it is like to be a philosophical zombie. Can you imagine such creatures? It seems like we can. But if that's right, it suggests that consciousness can't be identical to all of the physical processes in our brain. It is important to be clear here that no one denies that neural states are...
I mean, can you imagine not existing? No. Because what does that not existing look like? Sitting in a, like, floating in a black abyss? That's still something. Floating in a complete black void is still a something. So, like, can you really, truly conceptualize not existing? Because floating around in a black void ain't it. Or if it's a white void. Or just whatever, just plain void. Like, that just... You can't imagine not existing. Also, something to consider. How can you measure you? And I don't mean your body. I mean, like, you as a consciousness. How much of you is there? How much volume of you is there? Can we answer that with science? Can we answer that with physical measurements? Can we take a ruler and drag it out and measure how much you there is? No. So when it comes to the ideas that brain creates consciousness and consciousness is just an illusion, that doesn't really make sense, because in neuroscience, like, we can see that there's something there. Like, this all points to something being there, but yet we can't exactly make the connection. So no, this isn't a religion. It isn't religious to say the brain doesn't produce consciousness. It's a very rational conclusion to come to when we examine the hard problem of consciousness.
Relevant for consciousness. The issue is whether we can say that consciousness is nothing above and beyond what goes on in the brain. And it seems that as long as the hard problem remains unsolved, we can't really be justified in saying this. Back in the gallery, standing next to your new friend, you check the fancy brain monitoring device she's wearing to see what her brain is doing as she stares intently at the Rothko. Can you tell what she sees? What she feels? Until the hard problem is solved, we won't really know.
Yeah, I mean, she sees the painting, she can't see color, she's colorblind, she's looking at it. We can take a fancy brain monitoring device and see that she's not seeing color, but we don't know what it's like for her to see the color. We don't know what it's like for her to experience the lack of color. We don't know what that feels like. I mean, other colorblind people could empathize with that, but even among people with that common thing, it's going to be slightly different between them.
What do you think?
I think there's another one that goes with this. I'm not sure if this accompanies it. Let's see what this says.
In this Wi-Fi video, we'll explore the idea that your conscious experiences can be identified with particular states of your brain. Ever wondered why eating, drinking, playing sports, listening to music, or having sex makes you feel good? One explanation you may have heard is that all of these activities make your brain release a chemical called dopamine. Neuroscientists have found that increased dopamine levels are closely associated with the experience of pleasure. Of course, the actual science of dopamine and pleasure is much more complicated. But for the sake of philosophy, we can do with a simplified example. Suppose that neuroscientists can identify the distinctive brain states and processes associated with the conscious experience of pleasure. In other words, they've identified the neurocorrelates of a type of conscious experience. Does that mean that a particular conscious experience is a particular state or event in your brain? What does neuroscience actually tell us about consciousness? Well, first let's clarify what we mean by consciousness. Our focus is on what is called phenomenal consciousness. Phenomenal consciousness concerns the way our experiences seem to us. Think about it like this. For conscious creatures, things always feel some way or another. In other words,
it's a weird, tedious conversation that honestly, like, I can understand it, like the difference between like mind, consciousness, and like things like awareness. Like, there's differences in this. Oh, Bert, I don't have any more bread for you. Sorry, there's a crow that has now become my friend. And I know that sounds awesome in theory, but like, he just sits on the fence and stares into my windows and demands bread. So I'm a slave. I'm a slave to a bird. Anyways, so Bert's distracting me. What was I saying? Oh. Because Susan mentioned something like, well, is this guy talking about mind or consciousness? It's like, I don't know. I think there should be a conversation about that. Susan, do you think we could do like, I don't know, a collab or something, like on the Neogenian Oculus or something, we can talk about like specific terms and things and like what they mean, because that might actually be cool. Let's see, Shadow Dragon says yes. I don't know. I think this would be a good subject to talk about. What do you think, Susan? Susan! Anyways. Sure. Yeah, Susan says the difference between mind and consciousness is important for Neogenians. Yes, please. Let's talk about this in the future. Let's put a bookmark. Yeah, most people conflate the two. And see, I myself, I have a basic idea, but like, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this with Susan, possibly Philip, anybody else who wants to join. Like, we should talk about this later. Yeah, it looks like some other people in the chat are wanting to see that. Y'all want to see that? I think we can do that. I think that would be a good thing to do because it is important. It is important because I'll tell you what, when it comes to things like philosophy and like determining like what reality is, what consciousness is, what things are, like you have to be very particular about what you mean by words that you use. For example, like if somebody comes up to me and says, "Do you believe in God?" My question is going to be, what do you mean by God? Because that can mean very different things for different people. So like when you colloquially use the word consciousness or like mind, like what do those things actually mean? Because I think some people are using them interchangeably as if they're the same. Whereas in Neogenianism, we're like, this is something different. So yeah, I think it would be really good to have a conversation on the differences between like mind, consciousness, like talk about terms like awareness and that stuff. And like, let's kind of clear up some of the conflation. Hey, Maura, good to see you. Thank you so much for the super chat. Susan says, yes, it's essential to define terms so we can have intelligent discussions with others. Yeah. Totally. And this is something I'm really interested in, especially just being involved in Twitter and having these kinds of conversations with people like Stephen Knight, who says, you are your body without a doubt, and thinking otherwise is purely religion. And then I'm trying to like, offer information against that, but it's not working out well because it's Twitter and you can only say so many things. And I'm not very good at that. So it's like, I often run into this situation where I can read information and read a bunch of stuff and listen to a bunch of discussions and understand complex ideas. But when I have to turn around and explain the information that I've just learned, I feel like I fall short. That definitely is a weakness I have, that I understand things better than I can explain them in words to you. It's one of the reasons why I like to live stream. I purposely put myself out there so I can start talking and learning how to talk. So words are important. Here's my complimentary Loppy. Thank you. All right, let's keep going. Let me back this up a little bit. Let me back up to this little channel marker or this little chapter marker here.
Well, first let's clarify what we mean by consciousness. Our focus is on what is called phenomenal consciousness. Phenomenal consciousness concerns the way our experiences seem to us. Think about it like this. For conscious creatures, things always feel some way or another. In other words, there is something it is like to be a human being, a bat, a mouse, and so on. This aspect of our experience, the way it feels, is what we mean by phenomenal consciousness.
And this is the problem I have with the biodeterminalism that is in the anti-trans argument, is they completely deny that trans exists at all. However, people are experiencing being trans. They are feeling trans. They are feeling something. It is a phenomenal, like, conscious, like, you can't deny that. You can't deny that and turn around and say, well, it's just a brain disorder. It's just a miswiring. It's just something psychological. Like, you're completely treading onto something that's out of your league, I think, because they're trying so hard to use the trans argument to narrow down that we are products of our body. And it's going to open up a huge can of worms. And it's this particular can of worms that I want to highlight, and I want to shout from the rooftops to show them that they're full of shit.
By contrast, it doesn't feel any particular way to be a phone, a piece of cheese, or a bacterium. These objects...
Excuse me, I know exactly what it's like to be a piece of cheese. I completely disagree with this video, all right? I know exactly what it's like to be a piece of cheese. I doth protest.
Just don't have phenomenal consciousness. In addition to thinking about what it's like to be a human in general, we can also think about what it's like to have specific experiences, or to be in particular mental states. There is something it is like to see a sunset, to hear a trombone, to taste coffee, to crave a glass of wine, and to experience the good feelings we mentioned earlier. These mental events all involve phenomenal consciousness. We aren't trying to give a full definition of phenomenal consciousness here. In fact, it seems likely that phenomenal consciousness can't really be defined. It is a bit like what jazz trumpeter Louis Armstrong said about jazz. If you gotta ask, you ain't never gonna get to know. But now, at least, you have a better idea of what we're talking about. So, what would it mean to say that an episode of phenomenal consciousness just is a certain neural process in the brain? When we say that two things are identical, what we really mean is that there's just one thing after all. If you say that Superman and Clark Kent are identical, you mean that there's just one person who we can describe as both Superman and as Clark Kent. So if we identify a particular episode of phenomenal consciousness with a particular neural process, what we're saying is that there's really just one thing, which we can describe either in terms of what it's like to taste an orange, say, or in terms of neurons and brain chemicals. Neurons and brain chemicals are things we can study scientifically. So this identification implies that we can, in principle, advance our understanding of phenomenal consciousness through neuroscience. There are two sides to any claim identifying two things. If Superman and Clark Kent are identical, that means that whenever Superman is around, so is Clark Kent, and that whenever Clark Kent is around, so is Superman. As philosophers like...
Yeah, I think this is a common problem that scientists and things like run into, is that here we have two things, but there's something that correlates the two together. And it's something that's just like, you can conceive of something that has two expressions, or polarizing expressions, maybe. Maybe. I don't know if polarizing is the right word, but you can have a thing with different expressions. We often come across this in arguments of like femininity and masculinity. Like, are they truly opposites? If you do a lot of philosophical diving into that, you find they're actually two expressions of the same thing, which is the human experience. It's not so binary as you would think. Anyways.
To say, it means that the presence of Superman is both necessary and sufficient for the presence of Clark Kent. Similarly, if we identify a neural process with a conscious experience, we mean two things. First, we mean that the neural process is necessary for the conscious experience. That is, that you can't have that conscious experience without the occurrence of that neural process. And second, we mean that it is sufficient for the conscious experience. That is, that whenever that neural process occurs, so does that conscious experience. So, does our current neuroscience enable us to make such an identification? No.
Nope.
At least not yet. When neuroscientists are searching for the neural states that are responsible for...
We don't know! I keep going back to Stephen Knight, who says very confidently that we are our bodies. We don't technically know that. So how can him and other transphobic people argue that as a fact when we don't actually know that?
Nominally conscious experiences, they aren't actually looking for processes that are identical to conscious experiences. Instead, they're looking for what we call difference makers for phenomenal consciousness. They want to see what distinctive neural states and processes are involved in conscious states of different types. It's kind of like coming across a row of light switches and trying to figure out which one controls which light. For example, neuroscientists have found that a certain area of the visual cortex called MT+, is associated with the visual experience of motion. This might suggest that activity in MT+ is necessary for the conscious experience of motion, just like you might find that a particular light only turns on when you flip a particular switch. But it's not plausible that activity in MT+ is sufficient for that experience. Why not? Well, for one thing, we couldn't generate the visual experience of motion simply by putting a slice of MT+ in a bottle and putting an electric current through it. Flipping a switch on a wall isn't sufficient for turning on a light. You also need a source of power, functional wiring, light bulbs that work, and so on. Similarly, having a particular experience requires much more than just activity in a particular part of the brain. So particular neural processes can't really be identified with the conscious experience of motion. Instead, we should think of them as difference makers for such experience. Where does this leave us when it comes to a neuroscience of consciousness? Neuroscientists are making great strides in identifying the neural processes that make a difference to particular phenomenally conscious experiences. But this is just one piece of the puzzle. To identify phenomenally conscious experiences with certain neural processes in the brain, we need to identify the processes that are sufficient for such experiences. And there's a lot more work to do on this front. What do you think?
I think I have a personal vendetta against Stephen Knight and his outrageous claims that you are your body. I am kind of a bitter, messy bitch. Like, I am. Like, it doesn't overtake my whole life, but it's like, when somebody says something stupid and is so confident about it, I stew about it for a couple of days. I'm just like, ew. Ew. Hey, see you later, Shadow Dragon. Lucifer says I get like that too. Yeah, like, I mean, it's natural, it's human. Like, I mean, am I gonna remember Stephen Knight in next year? Probably not. But I like to introduce these sort of villain-like characters into my channel and be like, you know, look at what this asshole is saying. And he got really personally mad at me. You know what I mean? Like, he did not like that. He did not like that I said that. I'm looking for one particular David Chalmers thing. That I found. I swear it was on YouTube. There's a lot of pieces by David Chalmers, but there's like one particular one I'm looking for. God, my computer is slow. Laura says our bodies are only carriers, avatars. Exactly. Exactly. Laura says we know that we are not our bodies. As Neogenians, we know that we are mind, frequency. I mean, even in materialistic science, they acknowledge that this is a thing we cannot observe empirically. Here's this thing that obviously exists. Obviously, experience exists. Obviously, I have an experience of being non-binary, right? That experience can't be denied through empirical science alone. And this is, oh, here it is. And this is why I just get really irritated with anti-trans arguments, because they're like, look, you can't be trans. Look at this biological evidence. It's like, no, I'm sorry. Look, you can perfectly well just not understand trans people. You can perfectly just not understand what it's like. You can throw your hands up and be like, I don't get you. But you can't sit there and deny that those people are having that experience. It logically doesn't make any sense at all. You can't deny somebody's having an experience. You can try and label it as anything you want, but ultimately the experience is still being had. I like David Chalmers. He's like, when he looks scraggly like this, like, my man. Like, you are just fucking out there with your hair. I don't know. I think crazy hair sometimes can be a good sign. This is
more and more of a problem, and in fact, maybe it's impossible.
Okay. David Chalmers is great, though.
Dave, if I would have a psychological wish, it would be that materialism isn't true. I was trained as a brain scientist. Many of my friends are scientists, so I have a feeling that it probably is. Consciousness enters the scene and changes the dynamics. How are the different ways that we can understand consciousness?
Well, I was trained as a scientist. My attitude was that materialism had to be true. And there was just this little problem reconciling materialism with consciousness. And only over time have I begun to think this is more and more of a problem, and in fact maybe it's impossible to reconcile consciousness with materialism. But the basic views, my take on this thing, include materialism, the thesis that everything is ultimately physical, including consciousness. Dualism, the thesis there's two fundamentally different kinds of things, matter and consciousness.
So this kind of gets into like a really antiquated like conversation that philosophers have been trying to figure out forever. And it's pretty much what is the source of reality? Because right now we're experiencing reality as physical, right? Like this microphone and my face and my glasses and my, I can touch this. I can't magically pass my hand through my desk, right? If I try, I'm going to break my hand. So the question is reality purely matter? Is everything just made of stuff? And then on the other hand, there's this more like phenomenal ideological thing where it's like, oh, mind and consciousness and all this, spiritual stuff. That's not a very good way to describe it. I'm just trying to get you to understand the idea that we have matter and consciousness, and these are two conflicting forces, seemingly. Like, the one is not the other. And we have a lack and a gap in understanding how the two interact with each other when we know both exist. We know there's matter and we know there's consciousness. So how do they interact? This is the body and mind problem. Is reality purely mind, or is reality purely body, matter? In Neogenian, as Neogenians, we talk about the synthesization and just like the expression of both. Ultimately, everything is mind, consciousness, frequency, mathematical energy. Like, it's that. It's just there's the expression of that into matter, but the matter is still from mind, from frequency, from mathematics. See, this is a good conversation to have because I think, I think I've been too comfortable talking about like political situations, like social situations, but You know, too little do I run into just talking about these concepts that we hold near and dear to our hearts as Neogenians. So, you know, even though I'm not the best and I'm not perfect at explaining this kind of stuff, I think it's important to just like dive into here and just talk about it and learn. So it's like, on the one hand, I'm a little frustrated because it's like, why can't I explain this better? But on the other hand, I'm delighted that we're getting into this subject. So anyways, let's go back to David and his fabulous hair.
And to make the group complete, idealism, the view that all there is in the world is consciousness and matter is just derivative on that.
Okay.
Let me back that up a
The thesis
little.
that everything is ultimately physical, including consciousness. Dualism, the thesis there's two fundamentally different kinds of things, matter and consciousness. And to make the group complete, idealism, the view that all there is in the world is consciousness and matter is just derivative on that.
Okay, so let's take each of these categories and maybe dissect them down to where philosophers have thought deeply about it. Because most people think that it's either consciousness or God. I mean, that's the story. But there are some subtle differences here. Let's start with materialism. You've articulated three subdivisions that you can think about materialism in. What are they?
Well, the basic problem for materialism about consciousness.
Let's see. Laura says, question, can we say matter is our only perception of what frequency waves project, or want of a better world project? I think I know what you're asking. I mean, ultimately, the material world that we're experiencing right now is still made of, like, mathematical frequency. It's just a representation of it. So, like, even though it's like we have the sensation of feeling matter, like, this is still all made of mind. Boop, 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 boop. Consciousness. Let's see. I don't know if I trust an article by Yoga in Your Living Room. But it's just like, yoga in your living room says mind being everything that is experienced and consciousness being that which experiences. So I don't... I'm just laughing because it's like, from yoga in your living room. From the yoga in your living room.
Something like this. You could know all about the physical processes in the world, in the brain, and not know about consciousness. Somebody could know about every last neuron in the brain involved in, say, color processing. They wouldn't know about the experience. That wouldn't tell them about the experience of seeing red. So what's the materialist to do about that? Prima facie, something's been left out of the material story. So three different attitudes I can take. First attitude, the one I call the type A attitude, is just to take the hard line, deny consciousness. There's just nothing here that needs explaining. There's not really a phenomenon of consciousness at all. You explain everything there is to say about the brain, end of story.
And you call that eliminativism because you eliminate it.
Yeah. Basically, you say there's nothing else here to explain about what there is in the brain. Who cares about consciousness?
And there was a long tradition in that. So behaviorism, in one sense, ignored consciousness, and many well-known philosophers would take that view that we think we are conscious, but we're really not. It is an illusion.
Some people, behaviorists ignore consciousness, saying, well, that's not my problem. But the harder line is to deny consciousness and say, in fact, there's no such thing. It's an illusion. I find that view impossible to believe myself because I take consciousness to be a fundamental datum of our existence.
Okay, so that's type A.
Yeah.
So that's the first one. Second one.
Type B materialism, I guess, is the one that says, okay, there is this phenomenon of consciousness, and there is a gap between our knowledge of the brain and our knowledge of consciousness, maybe even a fundamental gap. But that's only really a conceptual gap. It's a gap in knowledge of a level of thought. So knowledge of the brain will never produce knowledge of consciousness. But they say, in nature, consciousness and the brain are one and the same thing. So there's no gap at the level of existence. There's just two ways that we come to know about this thing. From the outside, you look at a brain and you see a brain. From the inside, you think about a brain and it seems to you like consciousness. But it's just one thing in nature. That's a very attractive view in many ways. Unfortunately, I think it can't work, but a very attractive view.
So there's a gap in knowledge, but in principle, there's no gap in substance or being or ontology, we call it. So there's no real difference, but there is this knowledge difference.
On this view, there's two basic kinds of concepts. There's physical concepts, when we look at physical processes from the outside, and there's mental concepts, when we look at these processes from the inside. These are two different ways of thinking. But on this view, they're two different ways of thinking about one underlying reality. Physical processes and consciousness are one and the same thing.
Good. So it's still, it is materialistic because there's not, consciousness is not a real independent thing, even though they seem to be.
Exactly. One phenomenon in the world, two ways, two means of access to it.
Okay. Third approach to materialism.
So another view is that there is a gap between physical processes and consciousness in our current theories. That right now, thinking about the physical processes won't tell us about consciousness. But that's a gap that could be closed in the limit. It's that right now, we're not smart enough to figure out the connection between brain processes and consciousness. But if we do enough more science and enough more philosophy, perhaps in the ideal limit, we'll be able to deduce the whole story about consciousness from the physical story. So maybe once Laplace's demon knows all about the brain and all about the interactions of the neurons, he'll then be able to figure out everything there is to know about the experience of consciousness. It's just that we're not there yet.
And that would be a view of most neuroscientists, I would think.
Look,
that given enough time and the progress that we've had, we eventually can have go from the neural correlate.
I mean, it's really interesting because it's like you completely denying that there's consciousness at all and saying it's just completely an illusion. I mean, it's like, then why do anything? Like, for people like Stephen Knight, who thinks that you are your body, it's like, why have any sort of experience of accomplishing anything if you're just the same? It makes me think of that one guy, that one scientist who's like, we're pretty much the same as mold, like slime mold. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like, I'm pretty sure Steven wouldn't think that he's equivalent to slime mold, even though I think he is. Like, he would find an experience of value in who he is as a person and what he does and his ideas and the information he conveys. So it's just weird to me for people to try to argue that we're nothing. We're just simply a byproduct of like a physical, materialistic like interaction. Like, when nobody would think and feel that way, really. It's just weird. It's almost like dehumanizing yourself. That there's no abstract thought. There's no abstract creativity. There's no abstractness in general. Like how is it that the materialistic brain, the material brain, how can a piece of matter have an abstract experience? That doesn't make any fucking sense to me. How can a piece of matter have an abstract experience? That doesn't make any sense. It's got to be something else, right? Something else has to be going on there with that abstract experience. An abstract thought.
Of consciousness to the neural causes of consciousness. Fundamental difference now, but we can progress towards it.
I think this is probably the view of the average agnostic in the street.
Okay, so yeah, let me ask Laura has a good point. Says, I don't know how anyone can think that consciousness doesn't exist. That's like saying we have no thoughts, no awareness of anything, like one-celled amoeba. How, can you honestly sit there and say, like, what you experience, not even that. God, what's the right question? Is experiencing anything at all an illusion? Maybe? I don't know. I don't think that's the right way to word that question. Like, you have an experience. Is that an illusion? Like, can we just completely write everything off as illusion, all experience as illusion? And if that's the case, like as Stephen Knight saying we are our bodies and completely denying the trans experience, what makes the other non-trans experience more objective? What makes having the experience of not being trans more objective than not? Because, like, if you're trying to say, well, the biology makes the difference, we still have this problem, this hard problem of consciousness. So unless Stephen Knight is going to literally sit there and say, no, consciousness is not a thing, it doesn't exist, this is full of shit. We think about thinking. Yeah. Can you think about thinking? If you can think about thinking, you're conscious. Thank you.
About this question. We haven't figured out consciousness yet. Neuroscience can't do it yet, but somewhere down the line, we're going to get there. Now, my own view is there's a principled gap here. Neuroscience is just going to give us more. Neuroscience gives us structure of the brain and dynamics of what we do. And that's all it's ever going to give us. More and more structure, more and more dynamics, more and more behavior. And that's always going to leave, in principle, a gap to consciousness. But this other view, the agnostic view, basically says that, well, somewhere along the line, we're going to figure out how to cross that gap.
An argument can be made that the approach you're taking is a linear one, and maybe there's some nonlinear dynamics. The best example is an atomic bomb. You have 1.9 kilograms of your U-235 or whatever the number is, and it's radioactive, and you shouldn't touch it or get near it, but it's inert. And you add another ounce or whatever, and you have an atomic bomb. So you have a critical mass at some point. There's no difference. There's no consciousness there, no non-physical stuff, but you have a vastly different experience.
It's very tempting and seductive, I think, to think that the key to consciousness is going to lie in something like chaos theory, nonlinear dynamics. Who would ever guess that, the motion of a hurricane would emerge from simple principles of airflow? But what you find in all those other cases, like the hurricane and the water wave and so on, is complicated dynamics emerging from simple dynamics, complicated structures emerging from simple structures, new and surprising structures. With consciousness, we find something fundamentally new, not just more complex structures, not just more complex dynamics and functions, but a whole new kind of thing, subjective experience. And I think it's the kind of thing which in principle, just explaining.
So what he's saying is that consciousness isn't simply a more complex understanding consciousness isn't more complex necessarily based off like the brain. For example, when he's talking about hurricanes, there's the theory where it's like, well, if a butterfly flaps its wings and then that wind is going to eventually progress into a hurricane. Not precisely what he's saying, but, we understand that a hurricane is a complex thing that happens from basic elements of just like wind, weather, and stuff like that. But we're not getting the same thing with brains and consciousness. We're not getting a pathway that says, oh, consciousness is just a complex thing that is produced by the brain. They're finding that it's something that's there, but there's not really a distinct path between it. There's lots of correlation, but nothing that says what consciousness is, and nothing that says the brain produces consciousness. And here's the thing, going back to the trans issue. I think personally that trans people aren't like the most perfect put on the pedestal example of like self-actualization or realization of consciousness. But I think it's a very good example of people in the world who are breaking the boundaries of the idea of biodeterminalism, of that we are just simply a product of our bodies. Because here you have a trans person saying, I am not my body, I am something else. And all the materialistic scientists are going, oh, holy shit, wait a minute, no. And I think this is a fucking fabulous opportunity to talk about this thing. And I think in that sense, trans people should be very supported, especially in terms of being Neogenian, because they prove to us they are a living example of how you are not your body. So like I said, I don't think you should, obviously don't overly worship people, but I think trans people should be considered in a high regard. Like, oh my God, look at these people who really show us that we are not our bodies. I think that's beautiful. And I think that's why trans people deserve respect and the proper health care to get them what they need to express themselves as they are inside. Anyways, going back to David.
Structures and functions won't explain. So that's why I think there's a difference in principle here.
Subjective experience is a different kind of new thing than an atomic bomb is a different kind of new thing?
Different kind, more radically new thing, more radically different in kind. You can explain all the behavior, all the structure, all the function you like in the vicinity of consciousness, the things I do, the things I say, the amazing dynamics of the human brain. And it will still leave this further open question. Why is all that accompanied by first-person subjective experience of the mind and the world?
Okay, you got me fascinated because you now have three kinds of materialism and you've rejected all three. So I want to see what's left. You got a couple kinds of dualism and go for it.
So once you reject materialism, I think what you basically have to do is admit consciousness as a fundamental category of the world, perhaps alongside physical categories like space and time and matter.
See, here's where I like what he's saying. He's saying perhaps consciousness needs to be a fundamental category of what makes up reality, of life. Like, it is a fundamental part of what makes reality. This is where things are getting interesting to me as a Neogenian, because this is going along the lines of, hello, everything is frequency, everything is mind.
Then the basic question is, where on earth does consciousness fit in? We have this beautiful closed system of physics, space, time, mass, all seems to fit together seamlessly. Where is there room for consciousness? So here I think we have three different views for where consciousness might fit in. The first view is a view where consciousness lies outside physical processes completely and doesn't affect physical processes. So the brain and physical processes cause consciousness.
Which I highly disagree with, and this is what all anti-trans arguments go to, is that the physical process causes consciousness, which is... that's not correct. That's convenient for a materialist. And you know what's so interesting? Materialists always say you can't just believe in anything because like thinking that something exists when it doesn't, like that's just a belief. But they truly believe that matter is all there is. And matter creates all these abstract things. That's what this boils down to. The anti-trans argument is biodeterminalism. It's everything is a product of the body, is a product of matter. It doesn't make any fucking sense. How can something so mundane and so simplistic create something so abstract?
But consciousness doesn't affect the brain. So consciousness dangles outside the system. Some people call it an epiphenomenon. So this leaves physics completely closed, coherent, autonomous in its own right. Consciousness exists as something separate, maybe affected by the physical, but it doesn't make a difference.
So in a sense, causation is one way.
Causation
It's
is
a one-way street.
Exactly. One-way street from physics to consciousness. That means physics can go just fine. Strangely, though, consciousness, on this view, is impotent.
Yeah.
Everything I ever think and feel and so on in my consciousness never has any direct impact on my behavior.
So consciousness is real, but what's an illusion is that you think in your consciousness that you're having an effect on what you're doing, but you're not. Is that right?
Exactly. And a lot of people...
So within your consciousness, you think that your consciousness is an illusion. But how can you possibly be a thing that thinks something is an illusion without realizing that you're the thing which realizes things? Does that make sense? How can you sit there and think consciously, like as a conscious being, oh, I'm an illusion, but then you're actually the thing thinking you're an illusion? Like, how can you be an illusion if you're actually the thing? How can the thing you are that you're right now, how can that be false if you are that thing? Am I losing my mind? Or am I, like, this isn't... I swear to God. I am a thing. I experience things. How can I sit here and say that that's all an illusion? Because saying that's an illusion is still a thing saying it's an illusion. It's... My brain is exploding right now. Because that's what consciousness is. Consciousness is I recognizing I am a thing. I am a thing that experiences other things. And even if I was to experience all of this being an illusion, I am still experiencing illusion. It doesn't make it an illusion. It just means it seems like an illusion.
People find that hard to stomach, the idea that consciousness makes no difference. Because it sure seems to us all the time that I think and feel something, you know, the fire hurts, I take my hand away from the flame.
But if it didn't hurt and you had no awareness, you would have still taken your hand away, because that's all determined by
the physical processes.
By physical process. Yeah. But that does protect the closed system of the physical world, that there's no artificial intervention by something new.
Right. We take consciousness out of the loop in order that physics can say master of its own domain, so to speak.
Okay. What's the other alternative?
Okay, so the next most radical form of dualism is that consciousness exists and is fundamental, separate from the physical world, but it has an effect on the physical world. It actually has a causal impact on the physical world. So physics affects consciousness one way.
Whoa, let me back up. Hold on.
No artificial intervention by something new.
Right. We take consciousness out of the loop in order that physics can say master of its own domain, so to speak.
Okay. What's the other alternative?
Okay, so the next most radical form of dualism is that consciousness exists and is fundamental, separate from the physical world, but it has an effect on the physical world. It actually has a...
No, and here's why that doesn't work. You can't have something, a substance, that is one thing, and a substance that is another thing, but then say these both substances make up reality when they are separate. If they are separate, they can't really interact. And let's go to the absolute law that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only transition from one state to another. So with that, we already know that the universe, reality, can only be of one thing, of one substance. So it can't be both consciousness and matter. It has to be one or the other. Matter can't create anything abstract and complex as it likes to think it does. So the only other conclusion is everything is mind, not necessarily consciousness in a way, but like it's mind, it's frequency, and that mental domain, that mathematical domain of reality can make matter. Mind produces matter, not the other way around. The only reason why scientists say it's the other way around, that matter produces mind, is because matter is what we're experiencing first. And that's all we know so far. Mark, hello, Mark. Mark says substance dualism incurs the interaction problem. Elvis has left the building because there's a chili cheese dog waiting in the next building. Okay, yeah. Yeah. All right, going on.
Causal impact on the physical world. So physics affects consciousness one way, but here it's a two-way street. Consciousness comes back and affects physical processes. It makes particles move, let's say, in ways they wouldn't have moved unless consciousness had affected them.
Physicists and neuroscientists go crazy over this because now you're violating some of the fundamental seeming principles of the physical world, and that is physics is now not a closed system, that you don't have conservation of energy and matter, and you've disturbed all of the fundamental laws of physics. You like doing that?
This is a much more radical view, so I think we shouldn't go here easily. We should be very, very cautious, because you might think science has taught us that physics is a closed system, that the brain is a closed system. There's one route here, though, that I think might be worth pursuing. And this it's a hole that's left open, a loophole that's left open for where consciousness can have some impact. And that's in quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, we have the wave function, which evolves most of the time according to this nice Schrödinger equation. It goes along, but every now and then something strange happens. It collapses. Why does the wave function collapse? Quantum mechanics doesn't tell us. It just says it collapses when a measurement occurs. What's a measurement? No one knows. One of the big problems of quantum mechanics. But on the face of it, what looks like a measurement is measurement by a
Yo, and this is the part where mathematics come in, and why, as Neogenians, we say, in order to tie all of this together, we need to look at the mathematics as the language for understanding this. When he talks about waves and then waves collapsing, and we don't know really what that's about, that's going a very certain direction that we agree with.
Conscious observer. So you might think, boy, well, here is a point where if you wanted consciousness to make a difference to physics, it looks like the physics could not be designed more perfectly than for consciousness to play a role here. You look at the equations of physics. It leaves a perfect loophole right here for consciousness to have its impact on collapsing the wave function.
Now, a lot of quantum physicists would reject that as a simplistic view of consciousness, not a real deep understanding of consciousness, and call it deep amateur.
Is that, I wish there was more of this interview, like, because I would like to get into that conversation about, like, how physicists would, like, not really care for that. David Chalmers is fucking brilliant. I don't know. Let's maybe like listen to something else he says. A TED Talks. I'm not sure if we can watch TED Talks. The meta problem of consciousness. Oh, a whole hour? Oh, Jesus. I don't know about that. Lex Friedman. Oh, okay. So is the soul immortal? Oh, interesting. What things are conscious? Are we living in a simulation? All these things are really interesting. Okay.
Dave, I remember in the mid-1990s, I was really excited to read your material talking about your conversion, if you will, to dualism. It's sort of a view that I had, but felt very guilty about it because I was trained in brain science. But you made it acceptable for people who were scientists maybe to entertain dualism in some fashion. Do you still believe the way you did?
I do, yeah. Reluctantly, especially originally it was quite reluctantly, because I come from a scientific background. I was trained in mathematics and physics, and I want everything to be natural, reduced to the simplest possible set of laws and entities. And the materialistic view of the world is a beautiful, aesthetically appealing view of the world that promises to explain everything. Physics to chemistry to biology to sociology. There's this problem with consciousness. It just leaves a gap. Every physical theory ever devised leaves a gap to consciousness. So I banged my head against the wall for years trying to come up with a physically based theory of consciousness. Every week I had a different physical theory of consciousness. None of them worked. And eventually I came to see this is for systematic reasons. There are reasons why no purely physical theory will ever give you consciousness. It'll always be an objective theory of objective functions. None of that ever gives you subjective experience. So then it just seemed to me that on conservative scientific grounds, you don't postulate entities without necessity, but when you need to, when the existing theory doesn't explain all the phenomena, you've got to expand the theory. And therefore I said, okay, we've got to add new fundamental properties to our view of the world, not just space, time, mass, charge, but consciousness.
I have to ask you, did this conversion take place over a long period of time, several years, or was it like a sudden realization over a short period?
There wasn't a eureka moment, there was this gradual dawning. It's like, oh my God, I think I have to accept dualism. Materialism isn't going to do the work. And this was reluctant because I thought that materialism was the respectable, scientifically motivated view. So only over time did I come to see that no, you could be a dualist and it could still be completely compatible with science. You could still be naturalistic. You could have laws governing simple entities, and you could do science with it. You could have a science of consciousness. This needn't lead you to ghosts, to spirits, to demons, or even to God. So I think it was coming to see that reconciled me with this dualism.
So with your dualism, what did your scientific friends say when you first came out of the closet?
Oh, I remember my dad said to me, don't tell me you're going to spend your life looking for the soul. It's like, boy, many promising young minds have dribbled away their intellect on that.
So seriously, did some of your scientific colleagues express concern about your waywardness?
I don't know. I think, hopefully I'd earned a little bit of credit by that point as, having a reasonable scientific mind and appreciation for the scientific worldview. So it wasn't like it was just, laughed off. But on the other hand, there was the odd eyebrow raised. Boy, we have a dualist in our midst. I would like to think that over time, some of them have at least come to, not everyone's been converted, but I think maybe people have come to see that this is, in fact, a respectable option. You needn't be going off into cloud cuckoo land by believing that our inventory of the world's fundamental properties has to be expanded to include consciousness.
Now, there's a large other group of philosophers, people who believe in theism, theologians, who have taken your work and have used it to reinforce their view of an immortal soul or some sort of substance dualist, immaterial.
Talking about the concept of a soul here.
Substance that has a religious connection. How do you view those efforts to appropriate your work into their worldview?
Well, I would really love it if there's an immortal soul. Because, I want to live forever. And that's probably going to be the best way to do it, if I have an immortal soul. But as a scientist, I have to step back and say, what's the evidence? What's the reason to believe in this? And so far, I don't see any scientific evidence that forces one to believe in a soul. Yes, there's consciousness, but that's just another natural property of us as organisms in a natural world. One way there could be consciousness is for it to be attached to these indestructible things, souls that persist forever and exist after life and so on. I just don't see the evidence to believe in that. To believe in those things would be to take a massive inference from any evidence.
I mean, that's fair, but But, like, why not realize that consciousness is energy and energy can neither be created nor destroyed? That, you know, they talk about, like, well, things should be simple. It's like, why can't it be as simple as that?
Evidence that we currently have. So as a scientist, I just can't yet go there, you know. It's a hypothesis, but I just don't see why one should believe it's true.
Clearly, you can't exclude it.
No, of course you can't. You know, as a scientist, you've got to allow all kinds of possibilities. But what do you believe? What do you accept? You accept what the evidence compels you to accept. I don't think the evidence compels one to believe in souls.
One can say that if you go to the step of admitting that there is consciousness, something that is independent of the physical world as we know it today, that the concept of an immortal soul follows naturally, or some kind of soul, immortal or not, because a non-physical substance dualistic thing, because science itself, by virtue of the definition you just made, is incapable of evaluating this whole realm. It's incapable. It cannot apply the same methodology of experiment and testing because by
No, which is why when Stephen Knight asks me, oh, what are your peer-reviewed evidence? What is your peer-reviewed evidence that consciousness exists independently outside the body? And it's like, well, you can't have materialistic evidence of that, because that's the whole problem. That's why it's a problem to begin with. It's because we know it's there, but we don't have imperialistic evidence about it. So asking for peer-reviewed imperialistic evidence doesn't make any, it's not understanding the problem correctly, is what that does when you ask that.
definition, this dualistic substance is immaterial.
I think you can perfectly well do science with consciousness. Consciousness, after all, we can observe it more directly than we can observe anything else, at least in my own case. I can examine the contents of my consciousness. I could, write it down. I can parameterize it. I can study my brain at the same time. I can connect the properties of my consciousness, the properties of my brain. This is what's happening right now, actually, in some of the more interesting corners of neuroscience and psychology. People are going into labs. They're measuring properties of people's consciousness, perhaps by asking them, perhaps by studying their own state. They're correlating this with states of the brain, and they're coming up with principles, laws that say, when your brain is like this, your consciousness is like this. They study the way that consciousness develops over time. It starts simple. It gets more complex. Nothing there so far seems to be leading anyone to believe in souls. It looks like, consciousness starts simple, it grows, it fades out. If it was a soul, I don't know what kind of picture we'd expect, but...
Is your consciousness, let me try this word, immaterial?
It's not physical. Yeah. There are properties of the world that go beyond atoms in space and time with mass and charge. We need to add a further property to our inventory of the world's properties. Consciousness. That doesn't mean it needs to be located in some wholly different realm up in heaven or in the land of ectoplasm and so on. It may be attached to the same stuff right down here. It could be that even fundamental particles have consciousness as among their fundamental properties along with mass and charge. That's not to say they have souls.
But are you saying that science must be able to evaluate this stuff, or is it possible that according to your definition, where it is not of the current physical thing and it is immaterial, that science is unable to make a judgment ultimately of what they can talk about correlations or whatever, but it cannot ultimately judge that? Is that a possibility?
I think it's always an open question with any phenomenon that science won't be able to explain it. But as scientists, we should take the attitude of trying to devise the best scientific theory of it we can. And in the case of consciousness, there are puzzles. There are unique mysteries, but it seems to me that here is how we can actually make it a tractable scientific problem. Admit consciousness as a fundamental property. Try to study the way it correlates with everything else in the world, with brains, with behavior. Find the principles that connect it to physics, and so on, and then say, okay, here is the way the world works. Here are the physical laws. Here are laws connecting physical processes with consciousness. That's a natural scientific theory. That explains the phenomenon. Now, maybe somewhere along the way, we'll bat our heads up against a wall, and it's going to turn out that we can't make any more progress. And then, you know, maybe we're going to have to start from scratch. But so far, I think so good.
So, no.
So interesting, yeah. Kind of approaching panpsychism, as Mark says. As far as I understand panpsychism, it says that everything is conscious, like even matter. Which, right? That's what it's saying. Because, like, if that's the case, it's like, as a Neogenian, I'm like, kind of, not really, sort of. Almost there, because, like, everything is mind. Saying everything is mind isn't necessarily saying the same thing as, like, everything is conscious. You know, like, my vape, my nicotine vape, is not conscious. It doesn't have the experience of being a vape. I have to pee again. I'll be right back. Oh, hello. Like magic atomism? Mark says yes, consciousness as fundamental and mayonnaised. Mayonnaise. I'm sorry. What is this? I'm sorry. Mark just said a word that has, like, delighted me. What the fuck? Mayonnaised. Mayonnaised. Mayonnaise. I'm so fucking amused by the term mayonnaised. I'm gonna use that in as many ways as I possibly fucking can. Mayonnaised. It's a brilliant word. I'm not making fun of it. Like, it's just like, this is fucking fabulous. It's mayonnaised. 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 This is the most ingenious fucking shit I've ever heard. Right, yes, consciousness is a fundamental and mayonnaised around everywhere in a most trivial way. Yeah. Would it be mayonnaised or mayonnaised? Do you say it, okay, so when you talk about mayonnaise, like the condiment, do you say mayonnaise or do you say mayonnaise? By the way, mayonnaise is my fucking favorite condiment. I love it so much. Like, I love mayonnaise. Mayonnaise should be verbed. It really should, though. That's why I'm so, like, amused and just delighted by this. That should be verbed. Mayonnaised. Oh my god. Laura says in the 70s they were saying mayonnaise was good for your hair. Oh no, it's not, though. No, it's not. It fucks up your hair, though. You put mayonnaise in your hair, and it's gonna fuck it up. Your hair's gonna smell like a sandwich for a week. Mark says you're supposed to say it mayo, like clinic, not mayonnaise. That's sexist. Okay, mayonnaised, not mayonnaised. Mayonnaise. So I kind of found this interesting thing on Quora. Now, Quora is not like the end all and be all of sources of information, right? It's literally just a forum of like people talking about things. But I found this guy and I found it interesting of what he had to say. This is Johan John. He's a neuroscience PhD. He's a dabbler in philosophy of mind. He was upvoted by Michael Soso, BA Berkeley, psychology, biophysics, PhD, neurosciology, blah, 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 this, that, the other. So this guy has some credit, right? So we're talking about this question, do neuroscientists take the hard problem of conscious seriously? And is it even possible to solve? So I was just kind of reading what this guy had to say. And he had some really interesting things to say. So he says this, he says, it really depends on the neuroscientist. Many of us agree with the formulation of David Chalmers. However, much progress there is in identifying correlates of consciousness. There will always be a gulf between the objective science and the subjective aspect of consciousness. If you accept that there is a hard problem, then you have to accept that there are limits to science, and that consciousness is beyond these limits. Not all neuroscientists believe this, but many do. In my experience, many scientists consider consciousness to be too vague a concept to be amendable to scientific analysis. For an in-depth exploration of why neuroscience cannot explain consciousness, see the following essays by clinical neuroscientist Raymond Tallist. And I did look at this, and this was a really good article. So, what neuroscience cannot tell us about ourselves, debunking the tropes of neuromythology. So he says, there has been much breathless talk of late about the varied mysteries of human existence that have been or soon will be solved by neuroscience. As a clinical neuroscientist, I would easily expectate, I don't know what to... on the wonders of a discipline that I believe has better claim than mathematics to being queen of the sciences. Okay, so first of all, nothing is better than mathematics as the queen of science. Anyway, so for a start, it is a science in which many other sciences converge. Physics, biology, chemistry, biophysics, biochemistry, pharmacology, and psychology, among others. In addition, its objective of study is one material object that, of all the material objects in the universe, bears most closely to your lives, the brain, and more generally, the nervous system. So let's begin by giving all the proper respect to what neuroscience can tell us about ourselves. It reveals some of the most important conditions that are necessary for behavior and awareness. What neuroscience does not do, however, is provide a satisfactory account of the conditions that are sufficient for behavior and awareness. Its descriptions of what these phenomena are and of how they arise are incomplete in several crucial respects, as we will see. The pervasive yet mistaken idea that neuroscience does fully account for awareness and behavior is neuroscientism. and exercise in science-based faith. Okay, I want to read that again for you so you all understand what this guy is trying to say. He's saying the pervasive yet mistaken idea that neuroscience does fully account for awareness and behavior is neuroscientism, an exercise in science-based faith. While to live human life requires having a brain in some kind of working order, it does not follow from this fact that to live a human life is to be a brain in some kind of working order. This confusion between necessary and sufficient conditions lies between the encroachment of neuroscientific discourse on academic work in the humanities and the present epidemic of such neuro-prefix pseudo-disciplines as neuroaesthetics, neuroeconomics, and neuroscientology, neuropolitics, neurotheology, neurophilosophy, and so on. Lots of neuros. Dang. So the failure to distinguish consciousness from neural activity corrodes our self-understanding in two significant ways. If we are just our brains, and our brains are just evolved organs designed to optimize our odds of survival, or more precisely, to maximize the replicative potential of genetic material for which we are the vehicle, then we are merely beasts, like any other, equally beholden as apes and centipedes to biological drives. Similarly, if we are just our brains, and our brains are just material objects, then we and our lives are merely way stations in the great casual net that is the universe, stretching from the Big Bang to the Big Crunch. Most of those who subscribe to such neuroevolutionary accounts of humanity don't recognize these consequences, or if they do recognize them, they don't subscribe to these accounts sincerely. When John Gray appeals to his 2002 book, Straw Dogs, to a belief that human beings are merely animals and so human life has no more meaning than the life of slime mold. Oh, this is the guy. John Gray doesn't really believe that the life of John Gray, erstwhile school professor of European thought and London School of Economics, has no more meaning than that of slime mold. Else, why would he have aspired to the life of a distinguished professor rather than something closer to that of slime mold? Wrong ideas about what human beings are and how we work, especially if they are endlessly repeated, keep us from thinking about ourselves in a way that may genuinely advance our self-understanding. Indeed, proponents of neuroscientific account of human behavior hope that it will someday supplant our traditional understandings of mind behavior and consciousness, which they dismiss are mere folk psychology, according to this thing, of Professors Paul and Patricia, leading philosophers. They like to spectate about a day when whole chunks of English, especially bits that constitute folk psychology, are replaced by scientific words that call a thing by its proper name rather than some outworn metaphor. The article recounts the occasion Patricia Churchland came home from a vexing day at work and told her husband, "Paul, don't speak to me. My serotonin levels have hit bottom. My brain is awash in glucocorticoids. My blood vessels are full of adrenaline, and if it weren't for my endogenous opiates, I'd have driven the car into a tree on the way home. My dopamine levels need lifting. Pour me a Chardonnay, and I'll be down in a minute." Anyways, that would be such an awkward chemical conversation, right? And and is unlikely to replace folk psychology. So, okay, so he's pretty much talking about this lady who says, well, scientific terminology is going to replace, what we use to describe consciousness and things. But here's the problem with that, is subjective abstract experience, phenomenal consciousness. It's something where you describe it as in like, I feel this and I feel that. So if this lady is trying to think like, oh, this will eventually be replaced with more scientific language, how can you replace day-to-day language with something like this theoretically? Like, oh, don't talk to me, my serotonin levels are down, and my brain functions are doing this, and the glucuroids in my blood are my blood is full of adrenaline, and that. Nobody's going to talk like that. Nobody's going to describe reality in that way. Like, nobody's going to do that. You're not going to say, oh, my endorphins are sky high, or like my dopamine levels need lifting. And like, no, you're going to say, hey, I'm sad, I need to be cheered up. That is consciousness. That is a thing experiencing things. Moreover, there is a strong reason to believe that the failure to provide a neuroscientific account of the sufficient conditions of consciousness and consciousness behavior is not a temporary state of affairs. It is unlikely that the gap between neuroscientific stories of human behavior and the standard humanistic or common sense narratives will be closed, even as neuroscience advances and our tools for observing neural activity grow more sophisticated. In outlining the case that neuroscience will always have little to say about most aspects of human consciousness, we must not rely on weak Mysterian arguments, such as Colin McGinn's claimed in his famous 1989 Mind paper, Can We Solve the Mind-Body Problem? That there may be a neuroscientific answer, but we biologically are incapable of figuring it out. Nor is there... Okay, so that's an interesting thing. So here's this idea that, everything about consciousness is complicated, and we're not biologically designed to understand it. Like, pretty much saying that biologically we are not capable of understanding the answer to what reality is, this, that, and the other. And I have a problem with this, because my thing is, if you can conceive of something such as consciousness, you can eventually understand it. Just because you're at a place currently where you don't fully understand it doesn't mean that understanding it is impossible. Okay, if you can conceive of consciousness, if you can conceive of an answer to reality, you can understand it. That's like the first step, right? Like, oh, hey, gee, here's a problem. Let's solve it. So to sit and say that humans can't understand more complex answers to reality because we're simply not biologically designed to do so is a cop-out. It's a total cop-out. If you can conceive of the problem, you can understand it. Let's see. Nor is there such use in appealing to arguments about category errors, such as considering thoughts to be kinds of things which were immobilized against the mind-body, blah, 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 blah. Let's see. The outward gaze. This is a long read. Okay, we're not going to get into this, obviously. But continue to read this, please. I want to talk about what this guy has to say here, because I thought it was really interesting. And we're going to go down to the bottom, because he says a lot, like up the top here, getting into like a lot of like certain issues, like certain things. But I like what he said at the end. So he's saying, so finding neural correlates of consciousness is in theory feasible if we can find one-to-one if and only if style mappings between subjective states and neurobodily states, but in practice, this is almost impossible. Whenever we think we found and NCC, we find that things are way more complicated. Okay, and then going down to the bottom of his idea is that, in other words, when it comes to consciousness, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And again, a lot of I can like provide these links and stuff to read, but this is a lot of reading and my voice is giving out. But the more you examine the idea of consciousness and asking the question, where does consciousness come from? And trying to answer that question with, well, it's simply a product of the brain. Therefore, you are your brain. You are simply your body. Like, you were just biological. Like, it doesn't make sense, and it's not the answer to everything. It really isn't. So, yeah, this guy, Stephen Knight, who's trying to tell me I'm an idiot for saying that consciousness is not the brain. You are not your brain. You are not your body. He's actually the idiot here. So I think that's the end of that topic for today. You know, we're diving into the hard problem of consciousness, and we're finding that we can't exactly confidently say we are our bodies. To confidently say we are our bodies is a belief. It literally is a belief system because we don't have physical evidence for that. And to ask for physical evidence isn't really understanding the question. So there. Anyways, let's take a little breaky poo before we get into like the next issue. And we might actually, now that we're hitting, it's almost like 3 hours now. I think we might do no, we can't do a part 2 tomorrow because tomorrow the Neogenian Oculus is live streaming. Anyways. I guess Lauren Boebert recently released a ad campaign, including her son, and people are mad about it. I don't know. I've honestly never seen it. Let's watch.
Hey, Mom, you wanna go shoot some hoops? Sorry, Roman, I can't right now. I'm deciding what to say in my new campaign commercial. That's easy, Mom. Why don't you just tell him about...
Oh no. What the fuck? What the hell shirt is that kid wearing? What is happening?
Hey, Mom, you wanna go shoot some hoops? Sorry, Roman, I can't right now. I'm deciding what to say in my new campaign commercial. That's easy, Mom. Why don't you just tell them about how you carry your gun and always fight for freedom?
Well, I think they already know that.
Did you tell them that you voted to cut spending and increase American energy production?
That's pretty good.
I know. You should probably also tell them that you passed bills to create Colorado jobs and to secure the border.
Great points, Roman. What's next? I'm Lauren Boebert, and I approve this message.
Wait, what? I'm sorry, what the fuck did I just watch?
Hey, Mom, you wanna go shoot some hoops?
Sorry, Roman, I can't right now. I'm deciding what to say in my new campaign commercial.
That's easy, Mom. Why don't you just tell them about how you carry your gun and always fight for freedom?
Also, Mom, why don't you tell them how you got drunk in a family-oriented theater and had your boyfriend fondle your titties? Why don't we talk about that, Mom? Why don't we talk about the fact you were sitting in public, on camera, having your titties fondled by your date? Why don't we talk about that, Ma? Why don't we talk about that?
Well, I think they already know that.
Did you tell them that you voted to cut spending and increase American energy production?
That's pretty good.
I know. You should probably also tell them that you passed bills to create Colorado jobs and to secure the border.
Great points, Roman. What's next? I'm Lauren Boebert, and I approve this message.
Oh my fuck. Lauren Boebert dragged for having her youngest son star in a cringy new campaign ad. It was cringy. Colorado Republican Representative Laura Boebert is widely criticized after featuring her son Roman listing off everything she's gotten done for Colorado in a new political campaign ad. In a 30-second campaign video, Boebert's son, Roman, takes the center stage as he invites Boebert to play basketball, but then she says she's too busy preparing for a commercial. And her response being like, well, that's easy. You know, this, that, and the other. And it's like, yeah, LMAO, if you're trying to make believable ads, Boebert playing basketball ain't it. Maybe playing with different balls would be more realistic. Yeah, Boebert plays with balls, all right, but not basketballs. You're responsible for not secure. Yeah, she didn't do anything to secure the border. What the fuck? It's just so funny. Anyways, Lauren Boebert, everyone. So, I guess in other Twitter news, I had another argument with a Mormon man who's trying to say that Joseph Smith technically is not interested in young girls. To a point that's like really concerning. Wait, where is all that? Did he block me? Anyways, so we have this man. He's a hardcore Mormon. He's a recording artist, so he has some songs. If you notice, his profile picture looks really young. However, if you actually look, you know, how he looks, he's much, much older. So this guy, yeah, you don't quite look precisely how you look. And you know what? As far as his music goes, I have nothing bad to say about it. I mean, he's got some talent, all right? He's got some songs out there. The problem with Addison Glick is his extreme resilience to actual facts. So, Addison Glick has been arguing with me for the past few days. And he truly believes that at no point Joseph Smith was interested in children. As we know, the word that we say for that is PD file, right? I can't actually say that on YouTube. So in his mind, there's no actual proof that Joseph Smith was that. And as he keeps repeating, none of his contemporaries accused him of being that. However, I have provided a direct document of, oh, Jesus Christ, Joseph Smith's sexual charges of sexual crimes. And when I presented this document to Addison, He decided to say, well, it doesn't technically say that Joseph Smith was accused of being a PDF aisle. However, this document says otherwise. And even when asking him to read this, he still thinks, well, technically Joseph Smith wasn't accused of that, which is a really weird argument to me. Because in history, Joseph Smith was tarred and feathered for one, trying to steal the property of like people, but for two, also having questionable involvement with a 16-year-old girl. So much so that a town mob dragged Joseph Smith out of his house and took him to a doctor and demanded that that doctor castrate him. Addison knows this, but Addison thinks that this isn't technically proof that anybody accused Joseph Smith of that. See, even right here, I said sexual allegations involving Elsa Winters, Nancy Miranda Johnson, Miss Hill, Fanny Alger, and perhaps Miriam and Rhonda Stowell were made against the character of Joseph Smith from his contemporaries. Look at the doc and the sources on it. And this is like brand new. He's saying there were allegations against him because he was involved with other women while he was married to Emma, but not technically contemporaries accusing him of being a pedophile. Well, that's wrong. So Addison is taking this stance that I think is very similar to people who are into Trump. Like when you provide a document, and like I said, this document literally is of historical charges of Joseph Smith being involved with young women. He still thinks it's not technically evidence, and he often cries, well, that's not like a direct source. It's not a direct source. Obviously, I don't care about the fact that Addison can't comprehend this, but this is just an example of how somebody thinks within a cult, within a religious cult. This is what happens when you provide information to somebody and they can't register it. They literally can't draw the conclusions because they want so badly for it not to be true. So he's tried really hard. And this man also simultaneously expressed that the reason he thinks the church is true is because he asked God and then he got an overwhelming peaceful feeling. And that's how he knows it's true. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between feeling something is true and knowing something is true. Why can't I find... It's so weird. I saw a bunch of his posts, below here in my, notifications, but now they're all gone. That seems so suspicious to me. So when confronting Mormon men about the history of the church, it is on record that Joseph Smith was involved with underage girls. But when you confront Mormon men with this information, they do what Adam does, and they say, well, technically, nobody said the word pedophile. And so under that logic, since nobody technically said that word and while pointing their finger at Joseph Smith, him being interested in little girls is not true and therefore not wrong. And they also claim that it was common for people in mid-1800s for older men to marry young girls. But that's not true. The reason it's not true is because there's a literal census of people who got married in that time. And I wish I could find it because there's so many like fucking conversations going on here. But I did provide that. I had everything so organized before this. Sorry. It would be easier if Twitter didn't fucking get rid of like half the notifications. But anyway, so in a nutshell, this guy's reasoning is that Joseph Smith was technically not a pedophile because nobody technically accused him of that. But yet, miraculously, I was able to produce a historical document or an historical account of Joseph Smith doing those things. But when he looks at this, he doesn't see that information, which because it goes against everything he goes against. And his explanation for the oh, here we go. I think here we go. So he's asking the question, where did Joseph Smith's contemporaries accuse him of being a pedophile? And so I provided this evidence. I said, well, the tarring and feathering of Joseph Smith occurred on March 24th, 1832 in Hiram, Ohio, after Joseph supposedly positioned or possibly had sex with a 16-year-old, because it's not actually... Okay, so here's the thing. Joseph Smith had a relationship with a 16-year-old named Nancy Miranda Johnson. And the town, like her uncles, her brothers, I can't remember which ones, were not happy about Joseph Smith being involved with her in this sense. In addition to other things. So part of the reason why Joseph Smith was dragged out of his house, tarred and feathered was because, in part, of his relationships with a 16-year-old girl named Nancy Miranda Johnson. And this town mob dragged him out of his home and took him to a man named Dr. Dennison, and they demanded that Dr. Dennison castrate Joseph Smith. And Dr. Dennison didn't want to for certain reasons. But here's the thing. Addison is trying to say there's no technical proof. Why didn't any of Joseph Smith's contemporaries accuse him of pedophilia? Well, they did. They did because they demanded he was castrated. And people don't demand other people get castrated in that time for no reason. Castration was a punishment specifically for sexual deviancy. And when providing Addison with the document of Joseph Smith's charges right here, the sexual charges against Joseph Smith, he then tries to say, well, technically they didn't say the word pedophilia, therefore he was not actually charged with that. However, the sexual charges were because Joseph Smith was getting involved with young women. Right here in this document that has 22 sources, amongst which are direct sources from historical accounts and journals of people involved in that time. So in other words, Joseph Smith's contemporaries. So it's really interesting to me to provide this direct information, plus, you know, other links to that, and to have Addison say, oh, well, this doesn't count. He said no one accused him of pedophilia. Well, here in this document, they did exactly that. Plus, if somebody gets dragged out of their home and taken to a doctor to demand they are castrated, isn't that interesting? So it's a weird argument. It's almost being like, well, technically it wasn't this, but it was sexually oriented deviancy. And it's like, I don't know what kind of hill Addison is trying to die on. Also, Addison Glick says that it was only frowned upon being involved with young girls in the early 2010s. And he says this. He says, I would say that the early 2010s is where society started to look down on it. And on it, he means older men being involved with younger girls. And he says, you only have to go back to the 90s to see that every rock and rap song talked about getting with underage girls. So this is a really concerning point of view to me. This is a really concerning attitude to have about a man who funded your entire religious belief system. Oh, Susan says, I had to go away for a bit. Yes, we had to postpone live until next week. Lame. Well, if that's the sense. I think we might get more into this tomorrow, though. But I just wanted to point out, like, how you can show somebody who's, like, religiously indoctrinated and, like, brainwashed. Like, you can show them facts that say, like, hey, this is the sexual charges against Joseph Smith from 1826 to 1835. This is an actual account of him being accused of pedophilia. But this guy says no one accused him of that. Well, yeah, they did. It's really weird to present factual information to somebody who's so brainwashed and for them to turn around and be like, no, this didn't happen. It's pretty much gaslighting at this point. And this is what Mormon members do. This is what hardcore Mormon men do, is like when you narrow them down to talk about these kind of issues, they're going to completely deny it. They're going to completely deny the moralistic principle and the conceptualization of what happened. Honestly, I was planning to dive deeper into Addison Glick, but we're 3 hours into this thing at the moment, and I'm feeling kind of like worn out a bit. So since Susan is not going to go live tomorrow, I think we might just do another part and just like talk about this a little bit more, because he's also like currently like trying to still argue for this shit. Because even when when he's claiming he did read the document, he's still trying to say that it wasn't. I love it how it says including those that main content anyways. So I mean, this is a direct quote from the document. It says sexual allegations involving these women were made against Joseph Smith. Also, these women were teenagers. But then here Addison says, oh, these were just allegations because he was involved with other women. But he misses the fact that they were teenagers. Other women that were children. Yeah, right. Like other women that were too young. Hello. He's not going to get it. You are a gaslighter. And fact denier. These things are just like so. It's like, I'm not actually like, do I actually care like what this guy thinks? I mean, like, no. I just like to use him as an example of how like these people like fucking think. Drama. Anyways, if you want to join my drama over on Twitter, please follow me. We can talk about things over there. Jan Daemon on Twitter. Okay. Neogenian philosophy nerd, meta-rationalist, teleocratic, ex-Mormon, YouTuber, and trans-masculine. Thank you. I would like to talk more about this tomorrow. Let's do it. Let's go live tomorrow. We will definitely plan that. Kind of pick this up and then like kind of talk about other stuff. I do want to get into the whole Arizona abortion ban. And then there's this also the issue, I think it's in Louisiana, yeah, where they literally are making it where priests have a property right not to be sued for sexual abuse. So Louisiana is making it so priests can't be sued for sexual abuse. Interesting. Okay, we're going to get into that tomorrow. So anyways, again, I hate to leave you like not really going into depth about the Joseph Smith stuff, but you know, we've been live streaming for over 3 hours and I am tired. I am tired. It has been enough live streaming, I think. So let's continue tomorrow. Thank you everybody for joining me today. I think the most interesting conversation is talking about the hard problem of consciousness. This is something that I think we should watch more material on, and I think we should have more discussions on, especially, you know, as Neogenians, this is pretty much our forte. So anyways, I really appreciate everybody coming, participating. Thank you so much to all of our moderators who came into the house. And thank you to everybody who gifted memberships. Shout out to those. And anybody who super chatted, all that stuff. And yeah, there's that. I will see all of you tomorrow. We will live stream tomorrow, okay? And we're gonna do some fun things tomorrow too. We're gonna look at some fun React videos and things like that. So if you're down for part 2, join me tomorrow at roughly the same time. Thank you so much, Laura, for coming. Thank you so much, Lucifer. Thank you so much, Specs. Mark and Susan and Cassie was in here. Fun, fun, fun. Good Friday. Good Friday. Really love the conversation about consciousness. All right, peeps. Good night. We'll see you tomorrow. All right? Till we see you again. Till we see each other again. Toodles.